Hey everybody, 5.6, new video for solving percent problems. And our essential question for today is how can you use mental math to find the percent of a number? So we all like using mental math when we can because it's easy and it's quick. So that's what we're going to kind of get into here. So we're going to start with some easy ones, finding 10% of a number. Okay, so finding 10% of any number. What's 10% of 5? What's 10% of 1,000? What's 10% of 224? Actually very, very easy, okay? So let's take this first one here. What is 10% of 34? Okay, so the trick for 10% is you move the decimal one place to the left. Now, where's the decimal in 34? Well, we know 34 is actually 34.0 or 34.00 or 0.0000, right? And on and on and on. So 10% means one place to the left. So I'm just going to take this decimal right there, and my answer is 3.4. That is 10% of 34. I can check that and I can say, okay, if I were to take 3.4 and multiply it by 10, I should get back to 34. So let's see. Well, it's a 0 and a 0. Add a 0. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 3 is 3. Add them up. I'm going to kind of run out of room here. 0, 4, 3, and there's one decimal place, and so I would move that there. And we're back to the 34 we started with. So we checked it out. 3.4 is indeed 10% of 34. So what's 10% of 876? Well, again, look at that. The decimal is really right there. So move it one place. 87.6 would be our answer there. And I want you to take a second. I want you to pause the video, and I want you to try that one on your own plate when you're done. All right, so you used to earn 15 bucks an hour. Your hourly wage just increased by 10%. So what's your new hourly wage? Well, it doesn't say your new hourly wage is 10% of your former hourly wage. That would be really bad. It said it increased by 10%. So first we need to find what 10% of 15 is, because what we're going to do is we're going to take 15 and we're going to add 10% of 15, and that will give us our final answer. So what's 10% of 15? Well, again, take that decimal in 15, one place to the left, and so that's 1.5. So now we're taking 15 plus 1.5, and that equals $16.50. That is your new hourly wage. All right, the next is finding 1% of a number. So really easy as well. It's very similar to finding 10%, except we move our decimal not one place to the left, but two. So what is 1% of 54? Well, where's the decimal in 54? Invisible, he's right there. And you move it 2. So 1% is 2 places to the left. So 1, 2. Our answer is 0.54. That's a decimal right there. All right, what's 1% of 9.1? Well, our decimal is already there. So if we go in here, we move it 2 places to the left. I'm going to rewrite it. That's one place, but we need to move another place. And what do we do with gaps? We fill them in with zeros. So our new answer is 0.091. That is 1% of 9.1. All right, what's 1% of 0.8? Again, move the decimal 2 places to the left. So 0.8, 1, 2. It is 0. Fill in with a 0. 0. Then this 0, and then the 8. That is 1% of 0.8 or 8/10. All right, so finding percents is not always that easy necessarily, but what we just learned can be very helpful. But there's a couple ways to find percents of numbers, and we're going to get into that. So what we're going to do first is called get to the 10%. Okay, get the 10% first. So when it comes to finding 30% of a number, if I can get 10% of that number, I can then get to 30 really easily. And here's why. Well, 10% and 30%. If I had a 10% and another 10% and another 10%, otherwise known as 10% 3 times, that would be 30%. So if I can find 10%, I only need to multiply it by a 3 to find 30%. If I have to find 60%, I can find 10% and multiply it by 6. If I need to find 75%, That might be a little different. So we'll get into that. But let's do this first one first. What's 30% of 50? Well, first of all, what is 10% of 50? 10% of 50, move that decimal one place to the left, and so it's 5. But because we're finding 30% and not 10%, 30% is 3 times whatever our 10% was. So take your 5, multiply it by the 3, and you get 15. So what is 30% of 50? 15. What is 90% of 200? So again, get to 10% first. First off, find what is 10% of 200. Well, here in 200, if I move the decimal one place to the left, 10% becomes 20, but I need 90%. So take your 10% and multiply it by, you probably guessed it, 9. Okay, 9 times 2 is 18, add a 0, you get 180. And then down here, what's 110% of 30? Ooh, interesting. Okay, so still going to do the same thing. What is 10% of 30? So I don't know, well, let's see. 30, where's my decimal? It's right there. Move it to the left. So 10% of 30 is 3. I need 110%. So how do I do that? Well, when we need to find 30%, we multiply by 3. When we need to find 90%, we multiply by 9. So when we need to find 110%, well, if it was 100%, I multiply by 10. So the next thing would be for 110%, I'm going to multiply by 11. And 3 times 11 is, of course, 33. All right, and so this is a cool opportunity to see, okay, does this make sense? Can we kind of check our work and do some estimating as we go? What's 110% of 30? Well, question, what's 100% of 30? Well, remember, 100% means whole. It means all. So what is all of 30? 30. So does it make sense that 110% more than the whole would be greater than 30? Yes, it does. It makes perfect sense, right? And that's how we got 33. So it kind of checks out there. All right, coming up here. There's another way to find percents, and that's using fractions, okay? Now, what is 25% of 60? So hopefully we're going to get in the habit of remembering that certain percents equal certain fractions. So, for example, 25% we need to remember is a fourth. 50% is a half, okay? 75% is 3/4. But if we can't remember those right off the bat yet, then what we can do is simplify some fractions. Because remember, percent means per 100. So what's 25% as a fraction? 25% is 25 per or over 100. And if you simplify that, 25 goes into 100 4 times. It goes into itself once. So that simplifies to 1/4. Okay. So when it says what's 25% of 60, it's like saying what's a fourth of 60. And of is kind of the operative word there because we know that that of means multiply. So multiply 25% times 60, or in our case, multiply a fourth times 60. And we remember we put that over 1. Oh, and I can cross cancel here, right? So what goes into both 4 and 60? 4. 4 goes in once. It goes into itself once. It goes into 60 15 times. So go ahead and multiply across the top. 1 times 15 is 15. 1 times 1 is 1. And we remember that we don't need denominators of 1. So our final answer there is 15. What is 25% of 60? 15. Okay, what's 2% of 500? Well, remember, percent means per 100. So 2% means 2 per 100, which we could use that as it is and multiply, but we could simplify it first. And 2 goes into 2 once. 2 goes into 100 50 times. So 1/50th is the simplified version of 2 100ths. So again, of means we're multiplying. So we're going to multiply our 2% or our 1/50th times 500 over 1. Now, how many times does 50 go into 500? Well, it goes into itself once, and then let's see, 50 times 2 is 100. So for every 100, it goes in twice. And there's 500. So twice, 2 more, 2 more, 2 more, and 2 more goes in 10 times if you want to kind of drag it out that way. So we've cross-canceled. Let's multiply 1 times 10 is 10. 1 times 1 is 1. So what's our final answer? We don't need the denominator of 1. The final answer is 10. What is 2% of 500? It's 10. All right, here's the last part of today's video. It's finding the whole. Okay, so we've been finding actually what is called the part. You know, what is 7% of 48? Okay, what is the little 7%? What is that part there? Well, now we're going to kind of turn things on their head, and we're going to find the whole. And we're going to use what's called the percent proportion. So this is something you need to memorize, okay? You need to write it down, but you need to memorize it. Part over the base, and sometimes we also call the base the whole, okay? So I'm fine with either. Part over the whole is equal to the percent you're given over 100. Now, what does that mean? I'll show you. So, 75% of what number is 48, okay? So 75% of some number is 48. So, a couple things we need to remember. Of indicates the whole, and is indicates the part. And this is one of those things that's going to take a little bit of practice to get used to, but it's fine. You'll get it. 75% of what number is 48, okay? So there's some giveaways here, but the easy ones, I think, are probably the percent. So let's set this up as a blank fraction equals a blank fraction, okay? Now, the percent over 100. Well, here's a cool thing. 100, when you're doing percent proportion, is always going to stay 100. So we always write that spot, in that spot. And if we're given a percent, which we were, we write it on top, and we just write 75. We don't need the sign. We also don't turn it into a decimal. We just write 75, okay? And so basically what we're saying is that 75 over 100 is 75%, which it is. Okay, so now filling in the part in the base. 75% of what number? So of what number seems to go together. And we know that of represents the whole, which is the bottom or the base. So of what number? So wait, they're not telling us what number. So what do we do when we don't know something? We put in a variable. Is 48. Well, is the part, and it seems like 75% of what number is 48. Is seems to go with 48, which is the part, which is on top. So we're going to put the 48 up there. Okay. And now it's actually kind of like ratios, because they're saying 48 over some number is actually the same thing as 75 over 100. Okay, so is there a way to get 48 to be a 75? 48 to be a 75. Well, I don't know off the top of my head, but I do know I can start by simplifying this fraction. 75 over 100. Well, what goes into both 75 and 100? Oh, 25, right? So now I can rewrite these two fractions as 48 over x is equal to 25 goes in there to 75 3 times, and it goes into 100 4 times. So 75 over 100 is 3/4. And so is there a way that we can make 3 into a 48 and then get some kind of, proportionality there? Well, this 3 times something give us 48? Well, I think so. But if we're not sure, we can kind of do the division there real quick and say, well, it goes in there once, and that's that, minus 18. 3 goes into 18 6 times, and so that's, 18. Oh, my goodness, look at that. 16, right? So 3 times 16 gives us 48. So we do the same thing on the bottom, times 16. And when you take your 4 and you multiply by your 16, you got a 24, a 4, a 5, and a 6, and you get 64 as your answer. Okay, so 75% of what number is 48? Well, what we're saying is that if we took 75% of the number 64, we would get 48. All right, so maybe I think what the last thing I'm going to have you do is I want you to pause the video, give this one a shot here. 5% of what number is 10? Use the percent proportion like we have up here. See if you can get it. All right, go. Okay, 5% of what number is 10? So again, the easy part, after we set it up, is always the percent part, which is 5. And then it always goes over 100, right? That was that part right there. And so part and base, 5% of what number? Of what number? So it seems like the base or the whole part is what they're not telling us. Is 10. Remember, is goes with the part. And so it seems like the 10 will go on top. So this one's actually easy because What do you do to a 5 to make it a 10? Times 2. So what do you do to 100? Times 2. And your x ends up equaling 200. Or that's our answer. So 5% of what number is 10? Well, 5% of 200 is 10. And that makes sense, right? Because 5% isn't a whole lot compared to the whole. So 5%, a very small part of some number is going to equal 10. So a very small part of 200 is actually 10. Okay. All right, that's all I got for you guys. Thanks for sticking with it. We'll talk a lot more about this in class. See ya.